What's up, y'all? Marley Cross 316 back with another comic book flashback, and we are now looking at the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 38. This issue came out in July of 1966, and today we have a pretty interesting story to look at today. It is all about a guy named Joe, and a big thing about this issue is this is the last issue Steve Ditko drew. And so this is a pretty special issue in my opinion. Steve Ditko, he drew the first 38 issues of the Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 series, as well as Amazing Fantasy 15. He was the co-creator of Spider-Man, and this is the last Spider-Man comic he worked on with Stan Lee. So I just wanted to throw that out to y'all today, just letting y'all know that this is the very last issue we will look at with Steve Ditko's name on it. And so let's start out the issue today. As always, this is brought to you by Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and Artie Simek. And we start out the issue with a guy named Joe. This is the whole story is about this guy named Joe. Of course, this is a Spider-Man comic book. We're going to be focusing on Spider-Man and Peter Parker's life as well. And we're also going to look more into who Norman Osbourne is. We were introduced to Norman Osbourne last issue, and so we're going to see exactly what he's up to in this issue as well. So we start out the issue, we're introduced to this guy, and his name is Joe Smith, and he has this aspiration to be the big champ. He wants to be a fighter. So he has this manager, and his manager is kind of skeptical to help him, but Joe Smith for months has been asking Mr. Tompkins, that's his name, the manager's name. He wants Mr. Tompkins to be his manager for pretty much boxing. He tries boxing. Boxing doesn't work out. Joe Smith tries wrestling. Wrestling doesn't really work out. Joe Smith feels like a loser. Everybody in the locker room is calling Joe Smith a loser. And then Mr. Tompkins comes to Joe Smith and says, you know what? How about we try acting instead? I got you a deal to act in this movie. It's like an alien movie. You're going to dress up. You're going to do scenes as an alien monster. You're going to be pretty much the main monster in the story. So how about that? How about you be an actor? Joe Smith goes along with it. He's kind of skeptical about it. So Joe Smith comes up on the scene to pretty much do the role play. The guy says action. All Joe Smith has to do is just pretty much destroy stuff. All the stuff is made out of balsa wood. So Joe Smith does his own thing. He starts breaking things, and when a lot of the debris flies up in the air, it actually smashes into one of the arc lights, and the arc lights fizzles and it falls into a puddle of chemicals from a previous scene. And Joe Smith just so happens to be standing near that puddle of chemicals. It electrifies Joe Smith and causes him to pretty much pass out. So when Joe Smith finally comes to, he's in a daze, he's confused, and so that's where we're going to leave off for now. So let's go ahead and return to the life of Peter Parker. So Peter Parker is at the Daily Bugle. He's come to collect his check from last month's newspaper clippings that he had published to the Daily Bugle, and he still hasn't been paid from J. Jonah Jameson yet. And we see that another secretary has quit. This is like the third in a week, and it's only Tuesday. So J. Jonah Jameson here in this comic, he's pretty much complaining how Betty Brant was the best secretary he ever had, and he feels like it's Peter Parker's fault because Peter and Betty Brant had a fight, they had an argument. We also see Ned Leeds in this issue as well. Ned Leeds he was on a photo or a business assignment. He was on a business assignment in California. He had to leave suddenly. He had proposed, as we recall. He proposed to marry, Betty Brant, but Betty Brant said that she needed to give it time. She needed to see what Peter Parker had to say about it. So he's wanting to come back to hear an answer. Now Betty Brant is gone. As we know, Betty Brant has quit the Daily Bugle. So he's looking for Betty Brant. He asks Peter Parker, where is Betty Brant? And he says, I don't know where she's at. be my guest, try to find her. And so Peter Parker at this point, he's pretty much over Betty Brant, but we're also going to see later on in this issue that he is concerned about Betty Brant and her safety and her life. He knows that she doesn't have that many friends, and he doesn't really know about her family. And so he's very concerned about Betty Brant. He had thought that she left with Ned Leeds to go marry him in California, but that's not the case. So now he's very concerned about Betty Brant. Now let's go back to Joe Smith here. We pick up on Joe Smith. We now see that he's in a dazed position after that accident that had occurred earlier. And so in the next scene, he's supposed to be attacking these stunt doubles in a scene, and he just starts going like crazy. He's in a frenzy. He just starts going crazy, and he actually goes out of the way of the cameras and out into the streets. He starts turning over cars. He has super strength. Everybody is noticing. Peter Parker is caught in his thoughts, and he finally comes to. He changes to Spider-Man, and here we see the first fight between Joe Smith and Spider-Man here. Some great action scenes from Steve Ditko. And even though this is Steve Ditko's last issue, it has a lot of great action scenes in this. I mean, it's a pretty good, comic to end things right here. It's an end of an era, I would say, end of an era for this. Steve Ditko, wish he could have drawn more, but issue 38 was his last issue. Now here we go with Norman Osbourne here. Harry, who is Norman Osborn's son, drops him off. He's with Flash Thompson, and it looks like Norman Osborn is disguising himself to go into this meeting with a bunch of crime bosses. He actually offers to pay the crime bosses $20,000, and so they agree. He wants the underworld to know that if any one person can defeat Spider-Man, that person will be rewarded $20,000 from Norman Osborn. Now, Norman Osborn doesn't reveal his name, but that is very, very suspicious from Norman Osborn. We recall from last issue how he attacked Spider-Man from behind. Now he's actually offering to pay money for the defeat of Spider-Man. What is up with Norman Osborn? Why is he doing this? And how does he know Spider-Man, and what is the history behind Norman Osborn and Spider-Man? We really don't know for sure yet, but it is very well known by now that Norman Osborn is not a good guy. So we return back to normal life of Peter Parker. He's at school. Of course, he's going to be picked on by Flash Thompson and Harry Osborn, and even some of the people are, protesting very stupid things at school. Peter Parker wants nothing to do with it. And then we just see how Gwen Stacy is still very attracted to Peter Parker. She sees him as a mystery. So that continues to go on here in this issue. We return back to Joe Smith in this issue, and he comes back. He's still a little bit in a daze. And we see how the crime bosses here are gathering together, and the agreement that they need to defeat Spider-Man to get $20,000 for that one person that can defeat Spider-Man. And just again, more scenes at school, and we see Gwen Stacy still very concerned as to why are people always picking on him. He kind of just never really bothers Peter Parker, and she's very concerned about that. So here we see some of these underworld crooks trying to get in Spider-Man's way. Spider-Man's like, why are all these guys attacking me? And then we see Joe Smith. So there's a lot of back and forth scenes here. That's one thing about this issue. It goes back and forth between Spider-Man, between Joe Smith, Peter Parker's life. So finally we see Spider-Man just fighting off all these crooks. Joe Smith decides that he needs to go back to the gym to confront these bullies, these people that were picking on him before, and so he just starts hammering away at all these people that thought he just was a nobody. Spider-Man hears it from the gym, and that's where Joe Smith is at. Spider-Man tries to stop the fight. More fighting between Joe Smith and Spider-Man here. And here we go with just one full page of full-on sound effects. So here we go with great visuals here. Nothing but action scenes right here, folks. And so Joe Smith finally comes to. The police arrive on the scene, but then here we go with Mr. Tompkins, and Mr. Tompkins is like, wait a minute. The people at he says that the actors who had been filming the scenes, they dropped all the charges against Joe Smith, and they've actually watched the film and said that he's sensational, that Joe Smith is sensational. And we come to find out later on in this issue that Joe Smith is going to be rewarded a 5-year contract to be a professional actor. And so here we see a big change with all these, wrestlers here. They're actually congratulating him. Spider-Man is like, well, good for him, but my life sucks right now. And more fighting between Spider-Man and these crooks here. Spider-Man, he knows that by hearing these people that there is a $20,000 bounty on Spider-Man, so Spider-Man's just not concerned about it. We also see an appearance of Mary Jane. We haven't seen Mary Jane fully yet, but Mary Jane makes a cameo here in this issue. She wants to see Peter Parker, but Mary Jane leaves right then, and Peter Parker was too late to see her. Peter Parker had arrived just too late, and so there we go. We didn't get to see Mary Jane, but I think sooner or later we will see Mary Jane Watson. Peter Parker will finally get to meet her, but not in this issue. Peter Parker finally arrives home to Aunt May, and he wants to watch the news, but he keeps seeing just stuff about Joe Smith, and finds out about the 5-year contract, and he's like, you know what, I've had enough, I'm going to bed. And so it kind of ends on a somber note here, how Peter Parker, he's pretty upset about just how his life is going and why people are after him, as well as what's up with Betty Brant. So that's how we end this issue here. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, give this video a like and subscribe if you have not, and I will see you next time as we look at issue number 39.